Hello, everybody, and welcome to Here Be Dragons. I'm your host today, John Webster. We'll explain that in a second. But first, I want to address an elephant in the room. You guys, as expected, see Mr. Dan, voice of Geekdom, down there. Um, but this person is not AK, obviously. Um, now, we could say that our pet Irish troll impersonated AK and thus living up to his reputation. But the truth is, AK just couldn't make it today, so Peadar was nice enough to come and help us out. And you are, I know, a big Star Trek fan, sir. So
Yeah, and particularly this film.
Yeah, I don't think it was too much of an inconvenience
If
to
you
ask
give
you
me
to
an
come on.
excuse to watch one of my favorite films again.
Yeah. Um, so yeah, before we get into that, just want to address another thing. We've been gone for a couple weeks with this channel. There's a couple reasons for that. If any of you guys tuned into the last episode about 3 weeks ago, Stephen has decided to step back for at this point an indeterminate amount of time. But I'm very happy to see my good friend in the chat joining us. And also, I was going through some personal things. A lot of you know all about that. I addressed it in the last stream. So it just seemed a good time to take a couple weeks off. And of course, Nessie is working this week. So um, good. I'm happy to hear that. I know it was kind of up in the air. So Stephen will be we'll be back at some point, and we look forward to that. In the meantime, you will just have to put up with me as your host. But I was very thankful today to be joined by both Dan and Peadar to talk about Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan. Which I just realized is this year turning 40 years old. And wow. But yeah, how are you guys doing?
Doing well. Can't complain.
Yeah, I'm pretty good. Yeah, I'm excited to talk about this great movie. It's one of the best Star Trek movies, I think. Yeah, I personally feel it's the best one. I think it was the first one that I really connected with. And I think maybe it was actually responsible for my love of like the TOS era, because I sort of came to the movies first with the Kirk and Spock crew, yeah, doing pretty well. Glad to be here, and it's good to fill in. And we've got a good subs bench here at Here Be Dragons. So
yeah, actually, before we go into the movie, I just wanted to take this time. You guys have been on the channel and before, and a lot of people know you. But for the uninitiated, just Dan, we'll start with you. And tell the folks what you do and the kind of stuff you cover on your channel.
Well, I covered the Lord of the Rings. I think a lot of people probably know that, who are regulars here. As you say, I've been on several times. I cover the Silmarillion and the Lord of the Rings and the upcoming Lord of the Rings show. Yeah, I've got videos coming out on the Silmarillion fairly regularly, and I do occasional live streams. I haven't done one for a little while, but I should be doing one hopefully next week, I'm hoping.
Excellent.
Not this week coming, but the one after, I mean. So we'll see about that. But yeah, that's me. Voice of Geekdom on YouTube.
Cool. And Peadar, I know you don't have a channel, obviously, but
just been a very active member of the Here Be Dragons community and doing my best to wind people up and drive them crazy.
You do it well.
Yeah, and you have been on before. You came on for one of our Expanse streams. I
think I came to the community through the Expanse, and even though I love most of the same, the Song of Ice Fire and all the other elements of this fandom, but it's through the Expanse I discovered you guys, thankfully. And,
you and I, Peadar, are probably two of the only people that came to this community through things that weren't A Song of Ice and Fire, because I was Lord of the Rings and you were The Expanse.
Yeah, and contrary to what many people might think, I did in fact come to the community through Game of Thrones, even though there are some other things, Lord of the Rings included, that I am far more passionate about. But yeah, no, Peadar, we have been so overjoyed to have you, as a much beloved part of our community. Because I remember when you first popped up in the YouTube channels, Stephen, Nessie, and I were all kind of like, we have got to nail this guy down and get him to join in the Slack. And
I'm glad I did, especially with the 2 years that we've had.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I'm glad to see. I just noticed some comments in the chat that some people went ahead and watched the movie who haven't seen it, because we noticed in the Slack last night in Peadar that I was surprised by the number of people saying they hadn't seen the movie, and I thought, like, this is like considered not just a great Star Trek movie, but a genuine like science fiction masterpiece and classic. That, like, if you haven't seen it, you absolutely should. But I'm wondering, Dan, you said it was sort of your entry point into, sort of the original series. When did you see it for the first time?
I remember watching it on television at my grandmother's house. I must have been maybe 7 or 8, I would say, something like that. And I distinctly remember the space battle at the end, the Reliant versus the Enterprise, and the tactics and the tension. And I just remember seeing that gorgeous effect that they did with the nebula, and how striking that was. And I remember seeing that as a kid, and I can remember that day like it was yesterday. And yeah, I never watched any of this sort of TOS show on television, really. It always, for a long time, it felt quite dated to me, and I couldn't really kind of appreciate some of the kind of writing and some of the nuance of the writing and stuff until I was a bit older in some ways. But the movies really grabbed me when I was a kid. This movie I put alongside, you said it was a sci-fi classic. I put it alongside Empire Strikes Back for me personally. I know some people will probably disagree with that in the chat, but for me, this is one of the greatest movies of all time in this genre. It's my intro to the TOS crew, to Kirk and Spock and everybody else.
Yeah, I'll save the details of my first viewing of it until we go around. Or sorry, I'm pointing the wrong way. But similarly, the movies were my entry point into the original series. I think I had probably seen some Star Trek like on the TV. Like, I think when you were young, even if you didn't watch Star Trek, you were familiar with it just by flipping through the channels, because
I was familiar with TNG as a kid, so TNG came first for me, and then probably had only watched TNG before watching this movie.
Okay. Peadar, I'm interested to hear when did you see this, and like was this?
I might have, not to date myself too much, I think I might have seen this in the cinema.
No, that's cool. Like I
think I might have seen this in the cinema. I'm not. I always liked the original series. I was always a bit of a sci-fi. When I was cleaning out my dad's house after he passed, I found a book I wrote in elementary school called Gerbil Trek, about Captain Kirk's pet gerbil and his adventures. So I was always mad into Star Trek, and obviously got into Next Generation, and but like I love the original series, and Deep Space Nine is probably the only Star Trek that actually sort of trumps it in my estimation. But it's just, but this, of all the Star Trek experience, like this film is just, this film made me really truly love, because like the motion picture was a bit of a weird one. But like this was phenomenal, and what they did and the effects they did. Yeah.
Much lower budget than the motion picture had as well. They did a lot with very little in this film. They reused a lot of shots from the motion picture, I think. But I think just the whole thing was just tighter and more well controlled, and you get the impression that Roddenberry was just given too much of a leash on the first film.
It was about a quarter of the budget, 11 million or something like that.
Yeah, and the thing with the first one, because I have a lot of appreciation for the first one, but it's clear that what they were going for was a big science fiction epic that sort of featured Star Trek characters, and it didn't necessarily capture the same flavor and style and tone of the series, which is I think what a lot of fans had been wanting. So I was watching some documentaries and stuff about this movie, and you can just hear people saying like, yeah, this is the Star Trek that I wanted. But it is interesting. I did notice a lot of those reused effect shots that I may not have noticed on previous viewings, because I had just recently watched the motion picture, and yeah, it is funny to see all that. But
or what was the other thing I read after watching the movie there, that usually green screen or blue screen the viewfinder, the view screen with the starscape. In one scene, they just had a black sheet with holes poked in it and a light behind it. And they really cut corners, but it works so well.
It does. I wanted to take a moment to wish my good friend Laura a happy birthday. I hope you're having an absolutely wonderful day, and we do understand. I think you probably have other things to do right now.
There's reservations at Olive Garden.
Yeah, exactly. Enjoy that Olive Garden, those breadsticks. I know that's what you like, Laura. But anyway, so as far as my exposure to the film, it was really weird because I don't remember how much of the Star Trek series I had seen as a little kid. I assume that it was mostly flipping around the channels and seeing, old episodes, and then having seen enough to know that, like, through pop culture exposure, you know who Kirk and Spock are and stuff. But funny enough, my exposure to the movies was, for the most part, a reverse order watching for some reason. I don't know like to what degree. I think I'm trying to remember which movie had come out last. I think like it was just around the time that Undiscovered Country was coming out, and I think I saw each of the films in reverse. I know for a fact that I saw like Voyage Home, then Search for Spock, then Wrath of Khan, and then finally Motion Picture.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting because that like this one and the next two are kind of like a little trilogy of continuity within the film, aren't they?
Exactly. So it was the weirdest thing to see the movie where where David, spoiler alert, where David gets killed, mm-hmm. and then to next go to the movie where he's established as a character. But it somehow worked for me, which is so hilarious because I'm definitely known as one of those people who can't stand spoilers. And my entire experience of watching the Star Trek movies was spoiler after spoiler. But regardless, I ended up loving the movies. And I actually, a funny little anecdote, maybe it's only funny to me, but I remember when I used to go out with my mom to buy the VHS tapes of the movies. Like after I'd become a fan of them, I was like, you guys know me, physical media, I have to own the movies. Mm-hmm. And but I had done something to get myself in trouble, and my dad had punished me for no TV for a couple days or something. But we were planning to go out and shop and get the movie, and we were going on like a vacation the next day or something. And so it was this whole subterfuge of my mom and I making it out to the mall to buy the videotape of Voyage Home. And so it's just one of my memories I have about these movies. But and then we had to fib with my dad, and he's like, well, why didn't you just go out and get it today? And we're like, we did. But yeah, so that aside, I love this movie. I'm gonna turn people against me instantly. I don't know if it's my absolute favorite, like personal favorite of the movies, because if we're just talking like original series, I'm a really big fan of Voyage Home. I think just that
I really like The Undiscovered Country. I think that's a really good movie too.
Yeah, I like all three those three films. But as far as from a filmmaking standpoint, from a feel-good in-universe, all three of those films are sort of a bit equal. But from between the acting and what they did with the props and the models and the practical effects, they just did such a good job with this one.
Yeah, there's definitely a difference between like trying to determine what my personal favorite of the series is, and then objectively standing back, and I think you have to kind of acknowledge that Wrath of Khan is the pinnacle.
Well, it saved the franchise, and
yeah,
you can't really, from a historical point of view, you can't really overlook that. And also, this movie has got Ricardo Montalban's pecs in it, which gives it an extra little point. So.
Which is so funny, because every single interview I see with the director, Nicholas Meyer, he feels the need to address, because he's asked the question so often. It's like, yes, that was Ricardo Montalban's actual chest.
And then little things like, because of their cost cutting, they couldn't afford the composer from the first film, so they had to find this
young upstart named James Horner.
This sort of the upstart James Horner, and he did a pretty good job.
Yeah,
and he made a bit of a name for himself, and went on to do a few things.
Yeah, I mean, as far as like iconic Star Trek music, you can't really beat Goldsmith's main title, especially because of its use in Next Generation. But that said, like James Horner has always been my personal favorite composer, because his music is so emotional. But it's weird. This is young James Horner, so he was going for something different here. And plus he was just getting started out. This is less about necessarily, it does pull at your heartstrings, but maybe not to the degree of some of his later stuff. The great thing about this score is how the word they keep using is seafaring. It's very sweeping and grand. And
the other thing I found with it is, within the same sort of pieces, it was sort of very optimistic, very Star Trek-y, and then all of a sudden the violins cut in with this sort of sense of sort of almost a psycho peril. The knife-wielding maniac about to come through the shower curtain, and that's Khan in the background.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's...
Well, the great thing about because there's only a couple themes. They keep it very simple for you, but the way the themes are constructed, like Dan, you were mentioning, like the battle sequences. Mm-hmm. What's great about it is it keeps the fluidity with which it cuts back between like Kirk's softer theme, and then it cuts to Reliant, and it's da-da-da, and it's so fierce. And what it does is it keeps you apprised of exactly what's going on in the battle musically. And I think that's just so utterly brilliant. Thank you. I don't think anybody's commented yet on how I've managed to go ahead and go straight into talking about the music.
I beat you to it.
Yeah. but yeah, James Horner's music. It may not like his theme for this and for Star Trek 3 may not be like the most popular of the Star Trek themes, but I think it's pretty damn good.
He wasn't allowed to actually take from the motion pictures one.
Well, yeah, because they wanted to distance
the 60s. He went back to the original, like the series. I can't think of your man's name that did, but the 1960s, like the TV series theme.
Yeah, because it does start off with Alexander Courage's march. It doesn't use like his full theme, which I don't think anybody really used in full until the newer Trek films, and Michael Giacchino brought it back for the end credit sequences of the new Trek films, but they kind of, for the most part in these movies, stayed away from it because it's a very 60s theme. But Horner did use the march that sort of precedes it. And that's kind of what they did for every film since then, which was, even if the composer was writing a different main theme, they started it off with those opening notes that everybody recognizes as Star Trek. But yeah, so I don't know where you guys want to like start as far as like characters and story. I mean, maybe we should just talk about Khan, since his name's right there, but one of the all-time like greatest villains ever.
Yeah, they made the decision to bring in a character from TOS, from the TV show, and I think that was a really good decision. One of the things that they wanted to achieve, the studio wanted to achieve with this film, over the first film, was to give it a really strong villain, because the first film kind of had a villain, but it was kind of a sort of an abstract concept rather than an actual character.
Yeah.
And so they wanted to have a strong personality, and they went back and they took this character from Space Seed from the last episode of season 2 of TOS, which I actually went back and watched this week. It's not aged terribly well in ways. There's a very iffy character who is actually mentioned in the movie. It's Khan's wife. He mentions at the beginning of Wrath of Khan, who was a character who was a part of Kirk's crew, who was kind of swayed and romanced by this character, and goes and starts a colony with the Augments at the end of that episode. Yeah, that plot didn't age well. Rewatching that this week. But it was a good decision, I think, to bring that character back, and yeah, excellent performance for this,
and to bring back the original actor as well.
Yeah,
he's actually offered a lot more. I was reading, he was actually offered a lot more money than he got, but he knew that the production was struggling. He said, "I really love playing this role. I'll do it for less."
So they underpaid him, and he agreed to it. That's what you're saying.
No, but he basically said, "No, pay me. Just give me this amount, and I'm happy with that. Put the rest into making sure this gets to the screen." Because he'd been on Fantasy Island and being this really good and happy character, and he's like, "I really want to sink my teeth into a meaty villain," and he just really seemed that he really enjoyed playing Khan in Space Seed, and he's like, "Yeah, I'd love to reprise that role."
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's a lot of talk, and if you watch the behind the scenes stuff, about how he had to really go back and analyze his performance in Space Seed, because he'd been doing Fantasy Island for so long. He was like, I'm gonna be reading these lines as that character, and the audience isn't gonna buy it.
Yeah, it was a long time between that episode airing on television and this movie, actually.
Yeah,
15 years.
Yeah,
and then, but just the way he plays it, that he's so like cold and methodical, and it just scares the crap out of you.
Sorry, I'm looking at myself on the feed here, and I keep realizing that I'm doing the Spock thing with my eyebrow. It's really hard to not notice myself doing that.
Yeah, but you could have just said you were doing that on purpose.
and he just but all the characters acting, like even Shatner, who's I love Captain Kirk, and but famous for his over the top. He's not over the top at the scenes where he is. It's perfectly justified.
He is over the top at times, but yeah,
it fits with what's going on in the film.
Well, it wouldn't be Captain Kirk if it wasn't. So he's
I kind of like it's the moment we all know. It's Khan. It's like you're not going to be able to stop the Shatner from giving something like that his all.
It felt appropriate though. It felt appropriate when he does that.
Well, it's almost impossible. Like, I don't know, maybe you can speak to this, Peadar, because you said you did get to see it in the cinema, but like having come to it after, and grown up, like I feel like that was a meme before memes were even a thing. Like everybody like sort of made light of the screaming Khan moment. So it's weird to think of it in the context of seeing the movie fresh for the first time, but I love it regardless. But Shatner is actually really good throughout this film, and a lot of that was, a lot of it does come down to the director, and Nicholas Meyer just worked with him. I think he said like the more takes they did, the more relaxed Shatner got, and sort of let go of that movie star persona that he had, and just acted. So, but yeah, I love him in this one, and although I have to admit, I am a pretty big Shatner fan regardless. If anybody hasn't seen the show Boston Legal, like, you owe it to yourselves to watch that, because he is like, I know everybody knows him as Kirk, but I'd be lying if I didn't think of Denny Crane when I think of Shatner. So
yeah, no, I've seen it. I can see what you mean. I've seen Boston Legal. Yeah, he's quite the character in that.
Yeah. But yeah, no, and this, like, the cast is great. Like, you can't not.
Kirstie Alley's first big screen role.
Yeah, and she's great in this. Like, I remember it was different when I was younger, where I was like, oh, hey, it's Kirstie Alley from Cheers. But then as I grew older, going back to watch this movie, I really appreciated her performance. And I mean, it's nothing against the actress who plays Saavik in the later films, but I always kind of missed that Kirstie Alley didn't come back to play that role, because she's really good. And I like that moment between her and Spock where, they're talking Vulcan and she's like, he's so human. But and then talking about Spock, like, you can't talk about this film without Leonard Nimoy. Just the even obviously the big death scene, but all throughout this film and the franchise, honestly, he embodies Spock so amazingly. I love that scene between him and Kirk in his quarters, with the lines that are then repeated back at the end of the film, and talking about their friendship and the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few, or the one. Yeah, that's great. And I love that this film did kind of focus on there's a lot of stuff with the trinity of Kirk, Spock, and McCoy that I think was so central to the series, that they had some of that in the motion picture, but that it wasn't the beating heart of the movie.
So how do you want to go through this then? Should we go through characters or scenes, or how did you want to break this down?
I mean, we can do scenes. I just don't want to necessarily be tied down to that. But the movie does start off with the Kobayashi Maru, which I I was just thinking about this today, and there's probably an explanation for it somewhere, but I don't know how they came up with the name for that. But I don't know if anybody in the chat knows the answer to that. I'd be interested. But I love that because it sets up, a situation in the movie where you're like, wait a second, who is she, and is she the captain of the ship now, and Spock's over there? What's going on? Where's Kirk?
I don't know if there's a reason why it's called that, like why they chose that name, but I mean, that's the name of the ship that they're trying to rescue in that training scenario.
Okay.
The Kobayashi Maru. Like in universe, that's what the name is.
Okay.
Japanese ships, as far as I'm aware, have Maru sort of as a suffix. I don't know enough about the language, but just from World War II history and stuff like that, you see, merchant ships, Maru.
It's been referenced. That test has been referenced in other Treks since then as well. Like TV shows have referenced it a number of times. I think I haven't seen it, but it was depicted in the new cartoon that came out end of last year, Prodigy. It was mentioned in that, which I haven't watched yet, but it's yes, it is a clever opening. I really like Kirk's answer to the test as well. When we find out that he reprogrammed the test, you think, yes, that is exactly what young Kirk would have done. Yeah.
Well, and it's great because then that gives Kirk that sort of overconfident hero moment, which then we get the other side of that where he has to admit that he hasn't actually faced a no-win scenario, and
now he's about to. Yeah
but I love the way he plays that later scene where he just bites into the apple and he's like, I don't like to lose. but yeah, no, and talking about this early scene, there's a lot of visual things established that really shows what the director Nicholas Meyer was going for with this whole movie. Like Kirk walks in, and says, okay, lights up, and he's carrying, a book, and it's like all these sort of earthbound touches to sort of make everything feel more lived in, as opposed to, I hate to keep referencing back to motion picture, because I don't like to, not necessarily one of those people who likes to talk down about that movie, but they were going sort of in contrast to what that movie had established. And it's the same thing with the uniforms, which starting in this movie became a lot more militaristic looking, which is not really in keeping with Gene Roddenberry, but damn it, I have to say I really like the uniforms.
Yes, the uniforms are great, and they use them for all of the rest of the movies after this, the TOS era movies. Yeah, it's definitely an upgrade. They kind of compromised with the military thing though, because at one point the studio had them all saluting and everything, and they took that out of the final cut in the end. So Roddenberry was working on this movie as a kind of consultant, but he had no veto power. He had no real final say in things.
They ignored him on a few occasions.
Yeah, which I think was the best decision they could have made, honestly.
I always feel conflicted because Star Trek obviously was Gene Roddenberry's creation. And,
was it though? I mean, there were other people involved in the genesis of the show. It wasn't like it was just him.
Yeah. But I have to say, a lot of the decisions that were made for the future of Trek that were sort of in contradiction to what he wanted, for me, did end up being decisions for the best. I mean, if we jump to, talking about DS9, that is definitely not something he, was a fan of, and sort of the flaws inherent in humanity and all that, and the everything that lent itself to that being an ongoing storyline with the politics and everything like that. That was not really his vision for Star Trek, but it's my favorite of the shows, I think. And So yeah, I feel conflicted because it does kind of suck that Roddenberry was sort of, things were taken out of his hands at certain points.
There was a no smoking sign on the bridge as well of the Kobayashi.
I heard that and I was like, I'm really glad they axed that because that would have made no sense. But yeah, no, I liked a lot of the changes that were made for this film and later on. Like I said, the uniforms are a major plus. I actually had an action figure when I was little of Kirk in the uniform for this film, and I think it was funny because when this movie came out remastered in 4K, and seen all the details like on the uniforms and stuff, I did get a wave of nostalgia hit me. Going back to when I was a kid, but yeah, no, it's great. So anyway, I don't know if there's anything more you guys want to say about the opening sequence and
but just with all the antiques, and it just gives this. It really gets across this idea that Kirk is just one of the antiques sitting there in the middle of all these antiques.
It sets up Kirk's whole arc for the next few films as well, about how he's feeling older and more experienced, but also out of place because he doesn't want to be behind a desk. He wants to be in the captain's chair out there on the frontier.
Because Shatner wanted them to sort of de-age him a bit, like not obviously in the modern digital way, but that so I forget who, but convinced him, said, no, you're growing older gracefully. Like you can pull that off. You don't need to be the young hot Captain Kirk. You can be more mature and still have an air of charisma about you.
One of the producers said to him, a lot of actors, they aged gracefully. I see you as being the the next Spencer Tracy in aging gracefully. Like feed that Shatner ego. That's the way to do it. But yeah,
that was the line. Yes.
But yeah, I mean that whole thing with being surrounded by antiques, and it's even early on when Spock, after Kirk thanks Spock for the book, he says, "I know your fondness for antiques," and it's sort of laying the groundwork for that. And then you get that scene with Kirk and McCoy,
and the glasses.
He's going there to celebrate his birthday. He gives him the glasses, and I love Shatner.
The dreaded reading glasses. Yeah.
The way he responds to that, where McCoy says, "Well, you could say thank you," and he goes, "Thank you." Like he's not grateful at all. But and then McCoy's line of other people have birthdays. Why are we treating yours like a funeral? I mean, it's just
McCoy is the troll of the ship, isn't he? Really, he's the Peadar of the ship.
Yeah. But it's so great, and like again, talking about all the stuff about the concept of the character aging and going through all this. It's stuff that I got as part of the story when I saw this when I was younger, but it's really one of those things that allows this film to sort of change as you change. And when you go back to it, I think you see different things in it and different parts of yourself. And especially once you've, got some years on you, the line in this film that really kind of resonated as there's certain things in my past that I kind of regret. I think there's a line between Kirk and McCoy where he says, "You as a doctor should know the danger of opening up old wounds," and Khan is the ultimate old wound getting opened up, and it's this whole concept of you're going through life and all of a sudden something sort of ruptures open that you weren't expecting, and there's just a lot of these wonderful concepts about talking about life and growing older, and it just gives the film a lot of wonderful depth, because it's about something that's not just a major space battle, even though those are great in this movie. But it's just, I love that this movie has so much substance to it.
One of the things I find is it's sort of is this bit of a self jab at the episodic nature of Star Trek as well. Because if they'd only gone back and visited Khan, see how he got on, this could have all been avoided. I mean, if they'd only checked in on him, but they didn't, because that was last week's episode.
Yeah, it is. And, no film's perfect. I did notice some things like, it's funny. Well, first of all, like, really, they never went back to check on the progress. But also, like, we're not aware of the fact that apparently one of the planets in this system exploded and caused a major realignment.
Yeah, how did they miss that?
Yeah.
I'm sure there's some Trek technobabble like explanation that they could come up with, but I'm not sure that makes sense. But
but it's one of those things, you're wrapped up in the story, so it doesn't, I know it never occurred to me as that being an issue, but then you go back and you think about it and you're like, oh yeah, that's kind of weird. But that kind of leads us to the discovery of Khan and his people when Chekhov and the captain of the Reliance, being down to what they think is SETI Alpha 6. Turns out it's SETI Alpha 5, which that's another thing. It's like, is that ringing any bells? Remember that particular planet? There's something that went on there that you might want to think about. And of course,
Chekhov doesn't even realize until they're like on board the ship and he sees the plaque, and it's like, man.
Which, of course, we could also talk about the fact that Chekhov wasn't on the show at the time of Space Seed. But
he was on the night shift, apparently.
Yeah, I think I remember seeing some interview with Ricardo Montalban where he made it very humorous. He's like, he always imagines like a deleted scene where he's like running through one of the lower upper decks or something, and then he comes across Chekhov and he like pins him to the wall and he says, I'm going to remember you. I never forget a face. But yeah, no, that's fine. Like, I think that's the great thing about this movie is, okay, yeah, you've got a continuity error or two with like earlier events, but it all works so beautifully. Like, you honestly don't even like, I don't think I saw Space Seed until maybe about 10 years ago or something, because it's not something that you need to have seen to be pulled into the story of the movie.
No,
because it tells you everything you need to know. And but yeah, no, they beam down to the planet and they're like, this is supposed to be a garden, and it's like not. It's like, that's your first tip that something's off. And then they go, and I do love that moment where he sees, the belt that says Botany Bay, and he's like, Botany Bay, oh no. It's like, let's get out of here. And it's so funny, the captain is like, Chekhov, what's the matter? He's like, just shut up and listen to him, but you have to go.
One little in that scene, one little thing I noticed in hindsight was the chessboard. There was a chessboard. There was a chessboard, like a homemade chessboard at one stage, and just going on to the scene where it's like he thinks in 2 dimensions.
Nice, yeah. I've always
because like Spock and Kirk were always playing 3-dimensional chess.
Nice,
clever. Yeah, I never noticed that.
I never noticed it until this watching. It was just sort of a homemade chess set made with just sort of like little bits and bobs for the pieces, but just focus in on it. But I think that's purposeful in relation to what happens in the battle later.
But definitely, because they have that line, like you pointed out, that he thinks 2-dimensionally because he doesn't have experience. I think that's Spock's line, isn't it?
Yeah, which if you're traveling through space, it's a good idea to think 3-dimensionally, because
It's ironic because a lot of the battle is actually two-dimensional because it feels like a nautical battle.
Yeah.
And it, they don't really use the height axis. It kind of feels like a naval battle that takes place on 2 dimensions on a plane. But
and that is very much like the naval thing. That's completely on purpose because that's what they were going for with this movie. But yeah, I mean that's
hornblower in space, I think, is what they called it.
But that's also a criticism, really, of like space movies overall. So often things are, the focus is on sort of they do things 2-dimensionally, and it's like you could take your spaceship in all kinds of different directions. It doesn't just have to be flying ahead. But let's see where we leave off. So okay, and then we get the whole sequence with the really creepy slugs in the ears, which I have to say, like, if there's something I really remembered about this movie from when I was young, it was being freaked the hell out by that.
Yes.
And I think like that's why this was also like, I think it's probably why I gravitated more towards Voyage Home when I was younger, because this was also like the scary Trek film, because it had a lot of freaky parts. And the whole thing with Khan and the slugs was, very unsettling for me as a kid.
And just the calm way with which he's describing what happens, and it's like,
yeah. And there's actually a discussion. I was talking earlier about the way Ricardo Montalban, acts throughout this movie, and how sort of calm he is for like at least 99% of the time, and there was a discussion about Nicholas Meyer sort of talked to him. He was kind of scared about like giving him like having acting talk with him because he's this fresh young director and Ricardo Montalban is an experienced actor, but he did like talk to him about like dialing it back because he was more frightening that way instead of like taking everything 100%. And that worked brilliantly because there's something so unsettling, as you said, about like when Khan is talking about, those slugs and what they do, when they go into the brain and stuff. And it's just so well done. And the end of this scene is like one of my favorite transitions. Very simple. Just, I love the way when Khan says, "Tell me, where may I find James Kirk?" And then it cuts to Kirk sitting there and the James Horner music goes, and it's beautiful, and that starts the whole sequence with them docking with the Enterprise and going through the inspection and then taking off, which is just so unbelievably beautiful. And again, like, if I haven't said music enough, like, it's just a major point of why this sequence works.
But you get what I mean with the violins, though, cutting every once in a while. It's just sort of like this sort of like going on this, and then all of a sudden just like just this sort of this unnerving violin note just put in, just to remind you, they're sailing off into the unknown, and it's not going to go as planned.
Yeah, I mean, there's that one line by Sulu later on where he says, "So much for a little training cruise." But no, the humor, that's something else to touch on. The humor throughout this movie is so great, and I think through this upcoming sequence, it's so great when Kirk gets on there and he's talking with Scotty, about how are you doing, Mr. Scott? And he says, "Oh, I had a wee bout, but Dr. McCoy pulled me through." "Wee bout of what?" "Shore leave." But yeah, no, I love the whole sequence, and again, like as they're pulling out, you got James Horner's majestic music as they're leaving space dock, and Lieutenant Savick is the one in the chair, and of course Kirk is nervous about this, and you got that exchange with McCoy where McCoy says, "Would you like a tranquilizer?" And Kirk goes, "Mm-hmm."
But it's not very forced. It's very natural.
Yeah.
They feel very human. They feel very, very human, and the jokes they're making are jokes that you can picture two crewmates on a ship making, about suffering from too much shore leave, or
it reinforces Savik's line about how Spock is more human than she was expecting as well, because he is bantering with the rest of the crew like that. We know from the show that Spock does have a sense of humor, and it comes out at times. Quite a funny sense of humor, because he is half human as well, so he learns to embrace that side of himself. But
as a matter of fact, there's a really humorous moment with Spock, which used to be in the director's cut, but it was edited out in the past couple of years, which is unfortunate because it's probably one of my favorite moments of the movie, but it's still on the DVD, where after they beam back aboard the Enterprise, just as the climax of the movie is hitting, and when Kirk says, "What is working around here?" and then Spock's like, "Not much," and they go to climb up through, since the lifts aren't working, and so they're climbing through, and the line used to be, Kirk says, "That young man back there, he's my son," and Spock says, "Fascinating." And it's just so humorous, and maybe unintentionally so, but it's just a great moment between Kirk and Spock, and I've always loved that. But yeah, so yeah, then we get all this. We start to get the stuff with Carol Marcus and David, and it's it felt very sort of relevant all of a sudden with these concepts of the military, taking over, scientific projects and stuff like that. I'm like, that type of thing doesn't sound at all like it would resonate with our modern times.
Oh, it's been relevant for decades, unfortunately.
Yeah.
I do love that line of Carol. So, is it Carol? Where she's like, James been many things in his life, but a Boy Scout's never been.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's so funny. The fact that David would refer to Kirk as a Boy Scout, I'm like, no, not really. But yeah, I'm trying to think of the exact. This is why I don't want to necessarily follow scene by scene, because but eventually it does lead to we get to actually, before I was going to hit the confrontation between Kirk and Khan, but let's actually spend a couple more minutes on some stuff before that, because I'm going to go ahead and pause for the mid-roll. But there is that scene where Kirk brings in Spock and McCoy to show them, the video of the Genesis project to bring them up to speed. And what's interesting about that scene is when it was very, very early CGI used for that video where it shows the Genesis effect. And it's weird. I don't know if it's just because I'm so used to the scene, or what, but it still kind of holds up in context of what it is.
It was ILM, wasn't it? I think.
Yeah.
As well.
Yeah. It's really old CGI, but it works just because it's a presentation, basically.
Yeah, it's not supposed to look photorealistic, is it? It works because it hasn't dated too much, because it's kind of a visualization of something.
Yeah.
Some of the CGI on the screens and were the lads that did that went on to found a little company called Adobe.
Oh, nice. Wow. Okay.
And the software they used was PostScript.
Oh, I didn't know that.
It's so funny because now that I think about it, though, like thinking about the computer screens and all that makes me realize that I don't even bat an eye at it. But I guess that is some really old looking computer technology.
That's
Now,
what jumped out at me with the when they're calling from the station. It was really almost a TV, like 1960s TV series, The Round.
Yeah, that I definitely noticed.
Yeah, the CRT TV screen you can't miss, but unfortunately, there's not much they can do about that.
But it was a nice callback to the fact that, yeah, this is set in the time that the TV series was, not too long after when the TV. So it looked better, but it looked the same at the same time,
I've always been like really actually fond of like older looking futuristic technology. I think one of my favorite things about the film Alien is just how low tech everything is, but it's supposed to be futuristic. When they're getting their information from, Mother, the ship's computer, they go into this circular room with all these like lighted dots and stuff all over the place, and then just little, really old looking computer screen with the text typing out. And I don't know, there's just something oddly comforting about just looking at the past version of what we thought future technology would look like.
The anachronistic technology has a certain mood, doesn't it? I think.
Yeah, and that was actually what this is, off topic. Now I'm talking about Alien, but it was actually one of my favorite things when they came out with a video game a couple of years ago, or a computer game, whatever, where I don't remember what it was. I think it was Alien Isolation, and everything was modeled after the original 1979 Alien film. And so all the technology was like in keeping with that. I was like, yeah, I don't have the ability to play that, but I'm happy to see it.
That was the horror game, I think, wasn't it? That was made by the people that made Amnesia, I believe, if I remember correctly.
But okay, I'm going to go ahead and pause here for a second. First, I'll ask you, Dan, because you talked about it a little bit at the start, but do you have something coming up on your channel?
Yeah, so this week I will have a lore video out on Thranduil, who is the father of Legolas, talking a bit about him, his history, and backstory, and so on. As a character that I would speculate may show up in the show in the future. There's a lot of people enjoyed him in the Hobbit movies, I think, as well. So hopefully a few people will be interested in that. The week after, I'm hoping to get some guests on for a live stream and have a chat about something or other. It's vague, I know, but probably. So Monday, it's the 12th tomorrow, isn't it? So it'll be Monday the 19th. 18th, sorry. Yeah, 18th. I'll have a live stream. Not too sure who I'll have on as guests. I haven't decided yet. I'm talking to a few different people. So, but yeah, the live streams will be coming back. And then the following week, it'll be the first part of chapter 18 of the Silmarillion series will be out. And so I'm cracking on with lots more content. I've had a couple of weeks off recently because I had a birthday a couple of weeks ago. So took some time off for that, and just getting ahead of myself for the next few weeks this past week. So Kate is saying, give me all of the Lee Pace first. So there will be lots of stills from the movies, from the Hobbit movies, and also lots of artwork that depicts Thranduil as played by Lee Pace as well. So if you like him, then yeah, watch that.
Yeah, I don't even necessarily like Lee Pace in that way, but I will say, like, especially after seeing him in a lot of other roles, like, I get it. I do. If anybody wasn't watching Foundation, like,
I was watching. Sorry to interrupt. But I was watching a stream about the One Ring RPG recently, which I'm also interested in doing some content on actually at some point. and they were talking about that in that Foundation and how good it was.
Yeah,
sorry
and he is incredible in that. Like he definitely brings like that sort of Thranduil, energy to it, because it's very much like he's that same kind of overconfidence, like cocky, vibe that Thranduil has, but like there's so much dimension to and he actually gets to play multiple characters because, not to. This is the mid roll, so I guess I can talk about other stuff for a second. But like, he basically plays. There's 3 different versions of that character because they're clones basically, and so there's an older version of him. There's the middle-aged version who's the ruler, played by Lee Pace, and then there's the younger one who's coming up. And so at different points in the series, he's playing like a different version of himself.
Okay.
And it's just really cool to get to watch that. And the show is, I think there was some controversy amongst like lovers of the book about how faithful or not faithful the show was. But for me, as someone who just came to the show fresh, like I thought it was phenomenal. So I definitely recommend it to people.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so, okay, now getting off of that. So as far as my own channel, which you guys all know, John Webster Film, that's kind of on hiatus for the time being, just because for the moment I'm focusing on Here Be Dragons. But please, if you haven't seen any of the videos on my channel, go check them out. I've done a lot of fun stuff with a lot of fun people, and hopefully at some point I'll be back to doing that. Next week on this channel, I will be joined by Miss Kelly, Jaded Redhead, and she's just now finding out about that. No, just kidding. No, she knows. And we're actually going to do a stream that we tried to do a couple weeks ago, but it just, the timing wasn't right. We're going to be talking about Spider-Man No Way Home. That's right, folks. I will be talking about an MCU film.
And you'll be talking about it in glowing terms, I think, because you massively enjoyed it.
I loved it. And Kelly loved it too. So we're going to have a lot of fun talking about that. And so if you want to hear me really, really positive about an MCU movie, be sure to check that stream out. So it'll be next Sunday at 6:00. And then the week after that we'll be off because we will be at Ice and Fire Con. So hopefully some of you in the chat will be there, and we'll get to have some fun together. So that's what's coming up for Here Be Dragons. And I assume, Peadar, you don't have anything you want to announce since you don't have a channel, but
we even set the date, but John and I are doing a Howard the Duck retro review at some stage.
Now, Peadar, you know that has to wait for what was it, April Fools of whatever year,
April 1st,
2029. So technically it is scheduled. Y'all just may have to wait a while. No, honestly, the con is going to be vacation time, so we won't be streaming from the con.
You all deserve a good vacation, so heartily endorse that policy.
Yeah, but we will be back the week after. Yeah, we definitely are, Kate. That was something that was going to come together back when I was supposed to be doing streams for the past 2 weeks, and there was going to be an opportunity to potentially do a Moon Knight stream. I don't necessarily think that that's going to come together, but we shall see. We'll talk about it after Ice and Fire Con. Anyway, so I think we can dive back into the movie. So what follows is the big confrontation between Kirk and Khan. But what's interesting, and I always have to remind myself about this, is that the two of them never actually share like a scene together, like on screen together. Like they just have the conversation through the view screens, and then later on, you know, I don't know what you would call it. They talk to each other through comm.
The comm,
yeah. So it's really interesting to have your hero and villain of the movie not actually share the same space. But I don't think you even notice it, because that scene where they're, you know, where they decide to surrender to the captain of the Reliant, and then Khan just appears on screen. It's just such a, you know, an incredible moment, and the look of shock on Kirk, again talking about like old wounds just cropping up, and it's like the last thing he expects in that moment.
The two actors couldn't had scheduling issues as well, so they, even if they would wanted to, they couldn't. It wasn't feasible for them to do a scene together.
Yeah, I think Ricardo Montalban said that he was actually like reacting to just you know, someone off camera just sort of blankly reading the lines, and like it's got to be hard to, you know, pull out that great performance when you don't have like an actor opposite you like giving as much as, you know, you are. And you know, it's incredible that he's as mesmerizing as he is in it. But you know, that's why he is who he is. But yeah, I don't know. What are your guys' thoughts on that scene? Because it is kind of one of the great moments of the movie.
Well, the scene when Colin first appears, it's kind of like a sort of like a mic drop kind of moment for Colin, isn't it? Where he shows up and it's like, you forgot about me, Kirk, kind of thing. And I always wonder, does Kirk really regret not checking in on them? Because he probably should. Like, I think he probably should actually regret that. What I like about Colin as a villain is that it's quite understandable for him to be as pissed off as he is. You know, it's like he's not unreasonable in being upset by the situation. He was dumped on this like deserted planet. His wife dies, and they were living off these like grubs that come out of the ground, and there's like no life there. And it was through sheer ingenuity that he was able to survive. And so when he manages to get off planet, I would have issues with Kirk too in his shoes. So when he does show up like that, you feel some, not quite sympathy after watching him, you know, mutilate Chekhov, but it's just a really strong moment, because I suppose the shock that Kirk feels is multi-layered. I guess I would say. Yeah, I don't know if you want to go on to the next scene and talk more about how that relationship develops, or how we want to do this.
I love Colin's first introduction, just when he's like taking off like the sort of it's not quite chainmail, but the glove, and then peeling back the face.
And then of course the fact that he only takes off one glove, and like we're like, what's going on with the other hand? It's just one of those little details and then the director said, it's like, yeah, just leave the other glove on. Why? I don't know. Just do it. Because I think Nicholas Meyer is very much of the attitude of like leaving stuff like that in, for not because he necessarily has a particular reason for it, but because it's food for thought for the audience to get the imagination going in the audience's mind. And of course, he said something that I'm actually quite fond of, like it's not his job to supply answers to the audience, which you know, some of you might realize that quite resonates with me as per some of my tastes. But yeah, but no, I do want to talk about like that first confrontation scene, just the way that Kirk plays it, and this also goes back to, you know, what I was saying earlier about how Nicholas Meyer directed Shatner, because there's so many great moments in that are underplayed when Shatner's inclination might have been to overplay them, like later on when, when they found out how to lower the shields, and he says, "Here it comes." And I think early on Shatner was delivering it like, "Here it comes." Like, so Nicholas Meyer was like, "No, you want to underplay that moment because Khan's really intelligent. He's going to know that, that something's up if you try and add sarcasm to it." So
I just love with the glasses reading the.
Yes.
When he puts on the glasses to read the command codes or whatever, or the Reliant.
And that hesitation before he puts them on, he's like, "Damn it." It's just that wonderful thing of,
because the other two guys, I think it's Savick, and sort of look at the glass and go, "What are those for?"
Yeah, that's the thing, like, about Khan, having sympathy. Like, he is a war criminal, there's no way around that. But the fact of the situation that he was left in adds sympathy regardless, even if he's done terrible things. Like, we nonetheless feel sympathy for how he's been treated and what he's gone through.
He was also genetically modified. He was the product of eugenics, and so he didn't choose to be born that way. He just was. I'm not, Team Khan or anything, but but he's an interesting multi-layered character. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah. I think it was just.
I think in Space Seed, it's actually said that he was one of the dictators that were in that era of Earth history, because he was somebody who was cryogenically frozen in space, and he was from the 1990s actually. Originally, it was when the eugenics war happened in the Star Trek timeline. He was in Space Seed. He was said to. This is one of the other things that hasn't aged well. He was said to have been a Sikh who ruled in Asia, so he was playing kind of like an Asian character. He's got the surname Singh. Khan and Singh are two names that don't really go together very well either. And he's played by a Latino, obviously. So it's 60s logic for you. So he was said to have been one of the less malevolent tyrants of the eugenics conflict in that episode. So he could have been one of the worst ones. But he was one of the more reasonable dictators that were a part of that Earth conflict.
But he's
in the law.
At the same time, he was the type you could tell they would send 1 million to their death if it made sense to them.
Yeah.
But you do it coldly and calculatedly.
Yeah, man. Star Trek really was one of those shows that I always had to, and I'm not saying anything against it, but I definitely always made a point to go into watching old Star Trek episodes of putting myself in a 1960s mind frame, because some of that stuff, if you watch it with a modern lens, it's like, not great.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah. So okay,
obviously, if you make that episode now, you cast a South Asian actor. You don't cast a random Latino guy to play a guy with the name Khan.
And you definitely don't cast a white British dude.
No, exactly. Yeah,
But that's another conversation. But yeah, so then Kirk is able to turn the tables on him, just by, as he says later, he knows something about, these ships that Khan doesn't. And it's just a really great moment, not just with the glasses and stuff, but I love seeing Kirk sort of, working those buttons, and like it shows, his cleverness and his, the things that he does now, and it's not just a brawn, moment. It's using creativity on his part, and then I just love when they fire on the Reliance, and again the music comes in, and it's just.
I like the exposition of Savick though as well, to both explain what they're doing, but also sort of make it a bit. Yeah, no. This code is to stop people doing what we're about to do.
Yeah, it's so great.
But just the way he delivers
Yeah,
it.
exactly, Joe, which is what I was
Yeah.
So, but yeah, Dan, I think you wanted to talk about the other part of their conversation, which happens later in the film.
Well, I want to talk a bit more about the Shatner moment, the Khan moment, because one thing I like about that is that it's Captain Kirk is like kind of having him on there because he's tricking him because he's already got a plan and he's going to transport back to the Enterprise and turn the tables on Khan. So actually that moment is deliberate overacting on the part of the character, which is kind of funny, really, because such a sort of classic, famous movie moment that everybody knows, and it's the moment that you think of when you think of Shatner's kind of chewing the scenery, but it's actually it's Kirk that's overacting.
I have never. That's so
works.
funny. I have never thought of it that way. I never realized it. But you're absolutely right, because he knows that, that Spock is going to come and get them. So, yeah, that totally works as Kirk's attempt to deliver a performance. But there's just all those great moments with Khan's like delivery of all this great dialogue, a lot of it like Shakespearean, and just those great moments of when he says I've done far worse than beat you. I've hurt you, and I wish to go on hurting you. I will leave you as you left me, buried alive. And it's just, it's all those great, wonderful moments. And it's trying to avoid just saying, "Oh my God, that's so great, that's so great." But like this movie just encourages that, because
that's what I was saying when you were asking me earlier. It's like, I know all those lines. I haven't seen the film in years, probably 10 years since I last watched it. And I could, the buried alive, the revenge is a dish best served cold. It's very cold in space. Like, all those lines are just so memorable.
Which I
for the depths of hell.
Which I'm sorry, but it's like I just love to death that the revenge is a dish best served cold, that was used at the opening of Kill Bill and attributed to old Klingon proverb.
Right.
Just like, and that was the first Tarantino movie I ever saw, and right off the bat I'm like, okay, I get it, this guy's a super geek. Like, I'm ready for whatever he wants to throw at me now.
I'm still waiting for Tarantino Trek.
Yeah, I know it's funny because there was talk about that for a while, and I didn't really believe it. I'm like, I don't know. It's like, if that ever materializes, and I'm actually sitting in a theater watching it, I'll believe it. And I believe now that like they had backed away from that, and I'm like, yeah, I kind of expected that.
I think it's unlikely, yeah.
But yeah, that would be interesting for sure.
Yeah, I've always wanted to see Uhura's feet in a movie.
God. But yeah, we've been talking about, honestly, all throughout how great Montalban is. He's just like, he owns this movie, and that's why, like, and I remember when, not to talk too much about it, but obviously you have the controversy of not great casting as far as like nationality, but when Into Darkness came out, I actually was not as harsh on that movie as a lot of people were, but you can never, like, I'm of the opinion that you're never going to beat Ricardo Montalban as Khan. It's like such a it's just such an epic performance, and it's so classic. And
The thing is, they spend so coming up with that film. They spend so much time saying it's not Khan, it's not Khan, it's not.
yeah,
Khan. I loathe that film. That's a separate matter.
Yeah, it's a horrible movie. It's one of the worst movies I've ever seen.
And it's just, but one of the reasons why it is horrible is like, say, like that, like this is the Wrath of Khan's the only Star Trek film I ever cry for. Like I've seen it countless times, and that's the Spock scene, which I'm sure we'll get to. I cry almost every single time, a few tears, not bawling my eyes out, but they well up. That scene is just so powerful, and it was just the fan service they paid for it in Into Darkness, and then being saved by Tribble Blood. It's like, really? You're gonna take one of the most fabulous scenes of Trek history and just sort of make a Tribble joke out of it?
Yeah. Yeah, even though I'm not as harsh on the movie itself, at least not, sort of the first part of it, which I think it's okay until they try and ape from Wrath of Khan. But the thing about it was like, and this is off topic, but like with the first one, they'd kind of given themselves a clean slate to go off in new directions. And then what's the first thing we're going to do? We're going to just copy, the most famous Trek movie of all. But yeah, there's a reason.
I think a lot of the Trek movies have taken cues from this movie in different ways, though. I mean, every time a Trek movie comes out, it's always compared with this one. The villain is always compared with Khan. And little bits, people were talking in the chat earlier about the Moby Dick reference that we get in this movie, and then that comes back in First Contact, for instance, and stuff like that. Like this movie just kind of echoes throughout the rest of the franchise.
Yeah, I think the difference there is it's so beautifully done in First Contact, and it's earned because it speaks so much to Picard and what he's gone through with the Borg and all that.
Yeah. It makes sense there.
Which, by the way, everybody, if you haven't seen it, be sure to check out the chat that Dan and I had with AK and Danny on First Contact over on my channel, John Webster Film, because we had a lot of fun with that.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, back to this movie.
The contrast it with one of the things I love about this is, there's some incredible scenes of action and battle, but that's only a tiny, tiny fraction. When they do happen, they're incredible. But it's not a pew 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 film. It's about the emotional and it's about the characters going through, whether it's Khan's obsession with revenge or Kirk dealing with his past, both with his son and with this sociopath he abandoned on a planet.
Well, that's the thing. Back then, like those visual effects shots, especially when you're working on a limited budget, like that's hard to pull off. You've got to be sparing with what you decide to do. So the battles have everything that you can afford to actually put into them. And it forces you to make, the rest of your film about deep characterization and relationships and the dialogue and, the script and everything. And nowadays, I don't want to turn this into a rant about modern filmmaking, but nowadays it's so easy just to throw in extended action sequences that and I'll sort of harp on the music too. If you listen to the music for a lot of action scenes, it's just a lot of clanging sounds and just things that are just there to make you go, oh, wow. But the more of that you see, the less sort of interesting it becomes. Whereas you look back at the films of this age, and it was all rooted in character. And if there was a battle going on, you were more often than not cutting back to, watching what Kirk's doing, and then cutting over to the other ship and seeing, what Khan is doing, and talking about the music again. I was saying earlier that all the music is rooted in character themes, cutting back and forth. So everything's very focused. And I always compare like modern movies versus older films to, like, if you look back at something like another 80s film, RoboCop, and you think about all the, money they throw into like modern action sequences and how flashy, today's stuff is. And then take a film like RoboCop, and, one of the most sort of fist pumping moments of the movie is the dude riding around in his car with the music, with the musical score in the background. And it's just, so I think it's just a different age of filmmaking. But for my money, you get a lot more out of what they were doing here versus just overdoing everything.
There's probably only 2 or 3 minutes of actual phasers and explosions. Like,
yeah,
yeah. There's lots of tension in the battle scene at the end.
Because it reminds me of, I forget the name of the episode, but the first TOS episode with the Romulans. But I remember where Spock's dad plays the Romulan commander. But I remember reading that the guy that directed that episode basically was trying to channel sort of submarine battles and that tension of we don't know where the sub is, and that tension and the actual battle bit is just a flash in the pan, but a deadly flash in the pan. And this
you're talking about Balance of Terror.
Balance of Terror, yeah. And just that tension of the, in that case, sort of the destroyer versus the U-boat, but this is sort of the two ships hunting each other in the fog at sea, basically, which is the nebula. You know what I mean?
I really, really love the effect of the nebula. They kind of suspended some kind of liquid solution or something. I have watched stuff on how they did that before, but it's not fresh in my memory, unfortunately. But yeah, it's like some kind of weird kind of liquid that they put in some kind of tank and filmed. I think they must have had to speed it up or something in order to create that effect. But it looks tremendous. It looks better than anything that they could have done in CGI at that point in time, for sure.
Yeah, and I love that so much of the tension of that final battle comes from like the static on the view screens too. It's like you can't completely see, what's going on, and then there's a moment where then the screen clears up and they see the Reliant facing their direction and heading right at them, and then the camera pulls in on Kirk as he's like swiveling in his chair and the music hits, and it's so exciting and it's so riveting. And yeah,
also like the Reliant, of all the franchises, of all the genre, the Reliant is my favorite ship in the Federation.
Really? You like the design of the ship?
I love the roll bar with the torpedo too. I just always loved the. And funnily enough, it was upside down in the film. the original schematic had the engines up above, and whoever got the plans had them upside down and made the model and said, "Actually, that looks pretty good."
Well, it's so funny because I was thinking about this when I was watching the movie last night, and I think it's probably because of Khan's theme that plays over like every time you see the Reliant. I've just automatically like accepted it as like a villainous ship, but it's a Federation ship, so it's just so weird that I automatically see that, and it's so identifiable, with the character of Khan.
But just that's where they sort of, after the sort of the 3D maneuver, and he's like, Kirk's like, fire, and he blows up the roll bar. It's just such a powerful. I mean, I love. There's something to be said for models.
Oh yeah.
Mm.
Okay, so so this just becomes a part of the stream where I go on about how how much better models are over CGI, because like it's real, it's tangible. Like even when there's stuff that you can tell that it's a model in some older films, which actually I don't really. And maybe I'm just used to the look of the movie, but I don't really see much of that in this movie. Everything looks very believable to me. But even there's some other films, even like more recent ones, like there's stuff in Lord of the Rings. I'm thinking particularly Two Towers, where I can tell, and that's obviously a model that they're showing. But damn it, I say, give me that anytime, because it's real, it's tactile, and it feels like something's actually happening there. Versus, I think part of your brain kind of switches off when you know that something was done in a computer, because it doesn't have that same immediacy to it.
Uncanny Valley.
Yeah. But yeah, I love seeing all the work they put into model stuff. Somebody in the chat mentioned Blade Runner a few minutes ago, and I love watching the behind the scenes material of that movie, where you see how they construct the different layers for like that opening shot of Los Angeles and the way that's pulled off. And I think if you're coming to a movie like that nowadays, being used to computer effects, you don't really think twice about you might not think twice about all the work that goes into something like that. But then when you actually see the work they did, it's breathtaking. I think it's, at this point, it's almost a lost art. That although they do still occasionally do some stuff. Speaking of Blade Runner, on Blade Runner 2049, they did a lot of model work for that. But yeah, I love that, and I love seeing these two ships battling each other, and knowing that they had to build those. And I have to watch some of those featurettes, because I don't really myself remember how they did all the stuff with the nebula, but that's got to be really fascinating to watch. But yeah, so we've gone in, we've been talking about the battle, but there is that bit beforehand where we get that when they're still on underground on the moon, and Kirk and Saavik are talking about the Kobayashi Maru, and I do love that, where she says, will you tell me how you beat it, sir? I'd really like to know. And I just love the way he responds with, I changed the conditions of the test so it was possible to win. And and she's like, what? And then David says, you cheated. I changed the conditions of the test. Got accommodation for original thinking. I don't like to lose. But it's like, so of course in keeping with Kirk's character, but it's, like I was saying earlier, it comes back to bite him in the ass, because he has to then deal with a real situation of having to face death head on. And I love that moment of self-reflection that he has with David later on, where he says, I haven't faced death. I've cheated death and then patted myself on the back for my ingenuity.
Yeah, I was about to say, I mean, you say it bites him in the arse, but it also kind of helps his relationship with his son. Which, makes it even more sad when he later dies in the next, dies in the next movie. But it kind of sets up that dynamic where the son realizes there's more depth to his father than he maybe appreciated, and didn't give him a chance. And
it injects a bit of humility into Kirk, which makes him more human. I think.
Which
more human than he ever was in the TV show as well.
Which really goes to why I think I love the character Kirk as much as I do, because I don't think I'm necessarily like, I imagine if I was a kid and I had watched the original series sort of religiously, probably would have liked Kirk for, like his cleverness and, him doing the action stuff. And, but I think what made him more fascinating as a character when I, coming to him through the movies was the fact that he is portrayed as a character who has humility and makes mistakes and learns from them. And I'm glad I discovered him through these films rather than the original series.
And scared of getting old, and traipsing around the universe, is a game for the young, and not wanting to believe that but feeling it.
Yeah. And but no, you just said that line about traipsing around the galaxy as a game for the young doctor, and then I love Uhura saying, "What is that supposed to mean?" But I suppose we should go ahead and talk about the big moment, which is the death of Spock. It's always like this was something that I remember dreading, like when I used to watch this movie and when I was younger. That moment when you see the look on Spock's face as he decides what he's going to do, and he gets up out of his seat and goes off. It's like, oh no, it's coming up.
Sorry to cut across too. Or the later on where McCoy's like, yeah, you better get down here, and Kirk looks over and sees that Spock's gone.
Yeah.
And
he immediately, And again, like James Horner's music, like giving that sad note in that moment, and like Kirk knows that something's wrong. And I just love then the way, again, take a drink every time I say music. The music is going, and as Kirk, goes down there to the engine room, and he's ready to just run through and go in there, and the way they're holding him back.
He slides down the ladder, like
and just and the way McCoy's like, no, you flood the whole compartment, and he'll die, and then this guy says he's dead already. It's
and just. I love the fact that Kirk can't do the salute.
Yeah. Which is so funny.
I'm not sure if he could do it or couldn't, but the fact that he couldn't, he couldn't in that particular, it just made the sort of, it made it all so much more heart-wrenching.
Well, I do love the joke about that in First Contact when Cochrane tries to do it at the end. He's like, which, and I think I've told this story before, but it was so funny. In one of my classes in school, it was like, I forget what the class was called, but it's, where you're dealing with like clay and all this stuff and pottery. And I remember there was one day where I was just messing around with the clay, and I decided to take my one hand and like make the Vulcan symbol and stick it into the clay for like a minute long. And ever since then, I've been able to do it. So I screwed up my hand in some way, but hey, I can do the Vulcan hand symbol. But yeah, no, it's really emotional because, that's, I think that drives home, you've got the Vulcan and the human, right there. And the fact that, of course, the human can't do the symbol.
I was watching a video recently of a YouTuber who I like. So she's a trans woman, Jessie Gender. She does a lot of stuff about kind of identity politics type stuff, where she talks about gender issues and LGBT stuff. And sexuality and so on. And she talks also about Star Trek quite a lot. She's quite not well known for her Star Trek reviews and so on. And she was talking about the sexuality of Spock and how he's going to be appearing in Strange New Worlds, which comes out fairly soon, I think, in a week or two, I think. No, not that early. But we've just had a trailer for it. That's what it was, yeah. And so people are talking about Spock's potential sexuality because in the trailer he's depicted as kissing a woman who we think is his wife in a mock time, who he ends up who he's arranged to be married to, and then in that episode he kind of gets out of that marriage and so on. And he's always been a character who LGBT people have identified with in various ways in terms of headcanon. Anyway, the point being, she at the start of the video did the Vulcan salute, and then she's talking about, you know, him getting it on and so on, and then she does this with the Vulcan salute. Just, you know, signify where your imagination goes when you start thinking about this thing. One of my favorite YouTubers. She's a great YouTuber.
Yeah.
Oh God. And although that does remind me, because I know there's some stuff pertaining to those characters in Strange New World in, I think, season 2 of Discovery, and I haven't watched that show just because I didn't have either. You know, I think when it started, it was on CBS.
Yeah, it's moved around
On demand or whatever, and now it's Paramount Plus. But I do have Paramount Plus right now for watching Picard, so I'm going to try and fit in some binge watching of Discovery so I can then watch Strange New Worlds. I did watch the first episode of Discovery and quite enjoyed it. So, but yeah, Kirk and Spock, just like, yeah, the it's funny because I think I'm always in such shock like, even though I know what's going to happen, I'm always in such shock in the moment, you know, at the glass when they're talking, and like I'm always holding in my breath. The part where the tears start to flow is usually right after that with the casket and Kurt's eulogy, and you know, and the bagpipes, and you know, when Kurt, you know, says,
sure.
of all the souls I have encountered on my travels, his was the most human, and it's
the one time where Kirk's weird cadences in the way he speaks, Shatner's weird cadences in the way he speaks and breaks up his sentences. It's the one time it really works really well dramatically, actually, is when he pauses and says, his was the most human, and his voice kind of cracks a little.
Yeah.
It must have been, I don't remember how I felt, but it must have been for old, like, because I would have been quite young if I did see it. I'm not sure if it, but to not know that Spock was going to come back, hinted at, but.
Well, they give you that hope, don't they, when he does the mind meld on McCoy, and that was a last-minute addition to that scene.
Which I love.
Leonard Nimoy was planning on being written out of the franchise.
I do love Shatner's response to that moment in one of the behind-the-scenes documentaries, and oh my God, that's so, like, depending on your tolerance for Shatner, like that, all his interview snippets in that feature are hilarious because, like, you know, and I kind of say this with a bit of love, but he is so self-centered. Everything's about him. But you know, he has that moment where he's like, he's talking about both Leonard Nimoy and Harv Bennett, the producer. He's like, those two, they were in collusion. They knew Spock was going to come back, and I'm sitting in the theater watching, you know, the remember part, and I'm like, what was that? But yeah, no, it's great because originally the movie was going to end on an a very sad note without any hope at all of Spock returning.
I think they actually changed the music score last minute as well to end the music score on a more positive note in that last scene as well.
Yeah, and the bit on the Genesis planet and with Spock's, with the tube, like that wasn't there. They added that, and they added Leonard Nimoy giving the final, narration, and at that point, because they do mention that the narration at the end was like, for some of the people making the movie, that was almost a bridge too far, because it's like, all right, they're gonna know that Spock's definitely coming back with that, and then some people were like,
the title of the next movie also kind of gave the game away a little as well.
Yeah, but I think it was an excellent choice, because, like, especially with how great this movie turned out, it'd be different if this had ended up being the last one. But if this was going to be a reinvigorating new start to the franchise, like, you do want to give the audience a sense of hope going out of this movie, not have everybody be depressed. So I think
that's such a powerful scene, though, when the torpedo casket goes, and then just as reaches the planet, it just sort of the star sort of rises. And at first you think, is that the explosion? But then you realize that it's the star breaking the horizon. The horizon, and it's like, that's a really beautiful image.
Yeah, and then just that whole ending bit with Kirk, again going back to A Tale of Two Cities, like in the beginning of the movie, and he recites the final line of the book, and I just love where he's like, something Spock was trying to tell me on my birthday, and it really ends on this note of that close bond between these characters, and so even if you're not thinking about Spock coming back in the next movie, there is something hopeful regardless about the way they play these final moments, and apparently it worked, because in the test screenings where they didn't have that stuff added, people walked out of the theater really sad, and then when the movie actually opened, people were just in love with the movie and the way it ended, and so I think they definitely made the right decision, and I'm, of course, I think we're all happy Spock came back, because there was lots of great stuff to come with his character.
Because of a voyage home.
Yeah, him doing the mind meld with the whale in that movie. I don't think I've ever laughed so much in Star Trek ever.
I used to like. Yeah, I hope you guys don't mind. I brought up my mom earlier in the stream. Obviously, a lot of the personal stuff that's going on with me, so my mind's just going there. But I remember I would watch that movie with my mom, and when Spock was doing the mind meld with the whales, but it was Shatner's reaction to that, where he's like, and he just keeps walking back and forth. It's just such wonderfully great comedy in that one. And
John, you'd appreciate that. My parents got that on VHS for me for Christmas, but my mom accidentally left it out, like and sort of ruined my Christmas gift. She left it out the day she bought it. She left it on a table, and I saw it, and it's like, she tried to make up some excuse that it was for a friend of mine that was also in Star Trek, but I knew.
Yeah, I actually really regret getting rid of the old VHS tapes, because there did come a certain point where I had to make room for my DVDs, so a lot of the old videotapes had to go. But that was a particularly beautiful set that, like, if you lined up all the tapes, they formed the Enterprise. And so I always kind of regret that I got rid of those, but yeah, Voyage Home is great. I love all this stuff with Spock, especially his newfound love for profanity in that movie. It's like, They like you very much, but they are not the hell your whales.
There's scene when he knocks out the guy on the bus as well. The guy listening to his boombox thing on the bus. I love that scene.
So yeah, I'm glad they ultimately brought Spock back because
we should probably tie this in with the Savick character as well and talk about that a bit, because I think I'm right in saying that she was brought in to replace Leonard Nimoy, essentially. I think I'm right in saying, maybe somebody could correct me on that.
I think that was the speculation that she was the speculation of being because she was, I think her backstory is she was half Romulan, half.
Yeah, originally she was supposed to be half Romulan, that's for sure. Yeah.
So she did have a bit of an emotional side as well. She wasn't that pure.
Yeah, which made sense out of that because the way she played it never came across as like just completely Vulcan to me.
Roddenberry didn't like her.
What?
Roddenberry didn't like her character.
Yeah. Well, there was a lot of stuff Roddenberry didn't like that ended up being for the best. But yeah, I feel like I haven't talked about her enough because for me, she is one of the best parts of this movie. I think her character is great. I think the way that Kirstie Alley played her was fantastic. It's just all those little moments that she gives throughout the film of being very,
not putting out she's sort of she's sort of the viewer in the film.
Yeah. Well, yeah, because she's the newer one amongst.
So any of the exposition delivered to her. That's.
Yeah, especially you get that moment that you talked about earlier when Kirk puts on the glasses and he's like, you have to learn why things work on a starship, and so by explaining to her, it's explaining to the audience, and so it's a very it's a very good way of doing it. But yeah, like I said, I was sad that she didn't return to the role of Savick especially in 3, because I felt like there was something lost in those scenes by not having, that sort of emotional carryover from Wrath of Khan with her character. And definitely the actress who came to play her in the next 2 films played her very much more like you would expect a Vulcan.
Yes.
But yeah, we're winding down. Is there anything we didn't touch on that you guys wanted to mention?
Nothing huge. I mean, we could talk a little bit about the Genesis project and the device and that sort of thing. I suppose. I don't know if there's that much to comment on there. It's just a sort of MacGuffin, but it's an interesting sort of technological advance and so on. And then we find out in the next movie that it's kind of unstable and that the planet just sort of lives and dies very quickly.
Yeah, because I think something was made of this in Next Generation, correct me if I'm wrong, but the idea that a big part of why it became unstable is because the Genesis torpedo wasn't fired into a planet. It was made out of a nebula, and so that sort of played into part of why it was unstable.
Not sure. Don't know about that. Obviously, the Klingons wanted to use it as a weapon in the next film, which is a big part of what sets up the next film. And it's cool that they did that because it kind of, I don't know whether it was intentional, but it sets up the plot arc of the next movie as well.
But it was interesting because originally it was meant to be a weapon. It was sort of a secret weapon, but they decided that's a bit negative, a bit Star Trek-y. So they said, what if it's something to actually make, like, terraform a world, but if used the wrong way, it could be a weapon.
Yes, and they played on that to create conflict between the characters, between Kirk's son and Kirk, because Kirk's son is very worried about the military side of the research. We know from real life that a lot of science advances have become about because of military means and necessity in that sense. And there's the flaws in that system and so on. Makes you think about some of the higher issues of the way that humans conduct scientific research, really. Star Trek is always trying to hit those sort of cerebral issues and make you think about these things, and it's underappreciated part of this whole dynamic in the movies.
Yeah, I mean, that really is. I don't want to get into a larger conversation about this, but I think that is sort of the difference between what makes Star Trek, special and different from, things like Star Wars, and it's always about these more cerebral issues, or at least it should be, and sometimes it's not, and
Sometimes it's annoyingly so.
Yeah.
Sometimes it doesn't help, actually, if sometimes it can feel contrived in Star Trek to bring these sorts of issues in and hit you over the head with them in ways, but it's not overworked in the plot of these movies. The script is quite tight, and it kind of works with that, but doesn't beat you over the head with it.
Yeah. But no, it's interesting because I think when as far as like the Genesis, project, when I was younger, like I understood it as like the sort of plot, MacGuffin, as you say, to push it forward. But it's interesting, like as I've gotten older, like that scene between Kirk, Spock, and McCoy really resonates, where McCoy's freaking out, like, are we actually intelligent enough to have, done something like this? This is a bad idea. And I'm like, yep, it's a really bad idea, because there's no way on earth this just gets used for, for the scientific, reasoning behind it. It's, it's far too tempting to be used as a weapon by certain political and militaristic entities. So, but
when you put it in the larger context as well, when you think about Star Trek, the Federation has Section 21, which didn't exist obviously when these films were made, but that they, in terms of like the timeline, they existed already at this point in the timeline. And so if they'd have got hold of something like this, you could imagine what they would have done with it. For instance, I mean, that's non-Roddenberryan Trek from the future that's, kind of was introduced in later iterations of the franchise and so on. But it's interesting to think about.
Yeah, definitely. I'll just sort of start to wind things down by saying, like, even though this probably isn't my personal favorite of all the Trek movies, I think we kind of covered in that First Contact stream that's actually my personal favorite. Mm-hmm. But this is like, I think it's undoubtedly the most important Star Trek film, both in terms of how great it is, but also in the fact that, as you said, Dan, it saved the franchise. And without it, if this hadn't gone off, as amazingly well as it did, that would have been the end of everything Star Trek. And the fact that, I said earlier, this movie is now 40 years old, and you just think about all the, great Star Trek that we've seen in the past 40 years. And, it would have been heartbreaking to be deprived of that. So yeah.
One was sort of mindful. One of the things that makes Khan such a compelling villain is that you can understand him. He's not a Bond villain, and he's like when his underling is like telling him, you don't need. You've beaten him. You've proven. You've gotten the better of him. You don't need. He's like, you could just feel his obsession, but it was in a very human way. And then when that underling sort of dies, and it's like, you always had the superior intellect or whatever. It was a very cheesy line, but from their standpoint, it was you could just feel the emotions.
Now, I love that earlier moment when he says, you've already beaten, the plans of Admiral Kirk. You do not need to defeat him again. And he says, he tasks me, and I will have him. It's just so great. That's the thing. I was actually having this conversation the other night on the Here Be Dragon Zoom with a couple people about, you can have some villains who are actually pretty awful people, but there's something about their characterization that just makes them so compelling regardless. And Khan definitely falls under that category where, you don't necessarily want to, cheer for the guy because has very nefarious intentions. He's done pretty bad stuff, but he's so interesting and compelling. So regardless, he's a great character to
You
follow.
can feel why he's doing it. Like when you see the Enterprise slinking away, he's saying you don't need to chase. He's like, all you can think of was, but he does.
Oh, and that moment when when Kirk is like, no, he's going to follow us into the nebula, and then and then they start to fall behind, and Kirk gets on the comment. He says, Khan, I'm laughing at the superior intellect.
It manipulates him emotionally, doesn't he, Kirk?
But it was such an obvious goad. It was such an obvious, I want you to follow me.
But it doesn't matter to Khan. Like, he just can't stop himself.
I'm laughing at the superior. And then the other scene that stands out in my head is when the young engineer dies.
Yeah, which is a bit that there's two versions of this movie. You've got the theatrical version and the director's cut. That's a definite strength in the director's cut, that you actually know that this is like Scotty's nephew, I think, and so there's a little bit more emotional context to why Scotty is so upset.
But you have like with Kirk saying, I sort of give you permission to go. like it was very emotional scene.
Yeah,
very powerful.
So there's any final comments you guys want to make about the movie overall?
No, I think we've covered everything pretty well.
Okay. Thank you again, guys, for coming on to talk about this. I enjoy both revisiting the movie and chatting about it with you guys. And I hope you guys will come back soon for other topics. Peadar, I know you and we keep talking about doing a Highlander stream, so we're gonna figure out a way to make that happen.
Amongst other sci-fi films.
Yeah.
Did you already do a Highlander stream?
No. What I did was Amy on her channel had like a stream with a bunch of people talking about the shows of their youth. And so I got my 20 minutes to try to distill what that franchise was. But no,
it has one thing in common with the Star Trek movie franchise as well. Like you Star Trek 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, right? And Highlander, you have 1, 3, 4, 5. They both decide to skip numbers for some strange reason.
Yeah, it's inexplicable. There's no explanation. Although I don't know, we might have to dip into that alternate reality where there is a 2 and spend our time talking about how interesting
it
might have been. But yeah, No, thank you again, guys, and thank you everybody for tuning in. Next week, Kelly's going to be on, and we are going to be gushing about Spider-Man: No Way Home. So please tune in for that, because that's going to be a lot of fun. I'm going to have to work really hard to keep Kelly from turning it into a Daredevil stream due to Charlie Cox's 30-second cameo. But we will pay. Oh, there she is. We're going to. I'm sure we'll give due time to that, but yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun talking about Spider-Man, and it dips into so many things that I love about the character and past films from the franchise, and it's just going to be a lot of fun. So yeah. So that's going on, and Dan, you've got stuff coming up. So everybody, I put his links in the description. So if you're not already following his YouTube channel, go ahead and click on there and subscribe to his channel, because it is, like, honestly the best, Tolkien and Silmarillion coverage you're gonna find. So give him like all the support you possibly can, because you deserve it, my man.
Thank you. Much appreciated.
And
thank you for having me.
Yeah, no problem. And if any of you watching are not part of the Slack, and you would like to just come hang out and talk with us, go ahead and send an email to we3dragons@gmail.com, because that is the way you are really going to get to experience Peadar's expert trolling. So if you liked some of what you heard on the stream today, then you simply must join the Slack. Yeah, and once again, I'm going to say subscribe to Voice of Geekdom, because you have to. I said so, so there, do it. But yeah, thank you again, guys, and miraculously, like, see, this is why, like I said, this is a Here Be Dragon stream, so I've kept it to just a little over 2 hours. We didn't do like an epic 3-hour stream, which is always very tempting for me, but I controlled myself. But thank you everybody for tuning in, and we will, or at least I will, see you guys next week, and for those of you in the Slack, probably see you in a few minutes. Have a wonderful night, everybody, and live long and prosper, and you know what it is. Oh my God, I've completely forgotten what Steven's sign off is every week. Why? Be excellent to each other. There we go. It's all the pressure.
Say peace and long life this time, because that's the Vulcan saying. But
yeah, peace and be excellent to each other, and live long and prosper. All right. Good night, guys.